It was a legendary escape from a place that was supposed to be inescapable. 55 years ago this month, three men pulled off the impossible, breaking out of Alcatraz.
Have you ever wondered what happened to the three men who vanished from America's most secure prison on a foggy night in 1962? For 63 years, this mystery has haunted investigators, spawned countless documentaries, and divided experts into two camps: those who believe Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers drowned in San Francisco Bay, and those who think they pulled off the impossible. Well, buckle up, because in 2025, everything we thought we knew about the Alcatraz escape just got turned upside down. And I'm telling you right now, what science has uncovered is so shocking, so meticulously planned, and so much bigger than anyone imagined, that it's going to make you question everything you've been told about that night. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what happened to those three men. You'll discover evidence that governments have been hiding for decades. And you'll understand why this wasn't just a prison break. It was the beginning of one of the most elaborate cover-ups in American history. So, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive into the most comprehensive breakdown of the Alcatraz mystery you've ever seen. Before we get into the mind-blowing 2025 revelations, you need to understand what Alcatraz actually was. This wasn't just any prison. This was America's ultimate statement of power over its most dangerous criminals. Picture this: a rocky island sitting like a medieval fortress in the middle of San Francisco Bay, surrounded by water so cold it could kill you in minutes, and currents so strong they could drag an Olympic swimmer out to sea. The prison itself was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. 336 cells packed into a building designed to crush the human spirit. Every single detail was calculated to eliminate hope. Prisoners were counted 13 times a day. The guard-to-inmate ratio was nearly 1-to-1, unheard of in the prison system. Metal detectors at every checkpoint. Tear gas canisters built into the ceiling. Armed guards in towers watching every movement. And here's the kicker: in 29 years of operation, not a single confirmed escape had ever succeeded. 14 men had tried. Most were captured within hours. Some were shot dead in the attempt. A few simply vanished into the bay, their bodies never recovered, presumed drowned. The message was crystal clear. Escape from Alcatraz wasn't just impossible, it was suicide. This psychological barrier was just as important as the physical one. Inmates, guards, and the entire world believed the Rock was unbeatable. And that belief kept some of America's most dangerous criminals locked away from society. Al Capone served time here, spending his days playing banjo in the prison band, slowly losing his mind to syphilis. George Machine Gun Kelly, the notorious kidnapper who coined the term G-Men, paced these cells for 17 years. Robert Stroud, the so-called Birdman of Alcatraz, spent 42 years in solitary confinement. But none of them ever escaped. The Rock remained unbroken, its reputation intact, until three men decided to prove everyone wrong. Now, let me introduce you to the men who are about to shatter the myth of Alcatraz forever. And trust me, these weren't your typical desperate prisoners making a last-ditch attempt at freedom. These were calculated, intelligent, and absolutely brilliant criminal minds. Frank Lee Morris. The genius. Frank Morris wasn't just smart, he was scary smart. With an IQ of 133, he was in the top 2% of the population intellectually. But life had dealt him a brutal hand from the start. Orphaned at age 11, convicted of his first crime by 13, Morris spent his entire youth bouncing between foster homes, reform schools, and juvenile detention centers. What made Morris truly dangerous wasn't his intelligence alone. It was how he applied it. By the time he reached Alcatraz in January 1960, He already had multiple successful escapes under his belt. Louisiana State Penitentiary couldn't hold him. Neither could the federal prison in Atlanta. Each escape was more sophisticated than the last, each one a masterclass in planning and execution. Prison officials knew they were dealing with someone special. Morris's file was stamped with warnings about his exceptional escape risk status. But here's what they didn't know. Morris had already begun studying Alcatraz's weaknesses the moment he stepped off the prison transport boat. John and Clarence Anglin, the brothers. Then you have John and Clarence Anglin, two brothers whose bond was forged in the hardships of Depression-era Florida. Born into a family of 14 children, they learned early that loyalty to family meant everything. When times got tough, they turned to bank robbery, but they never worked alone and never betrayed each other. What made the Anglins perfect partners for Morris wasn't just their criminal experience. It was their unshakable trust in each other and their intimate knowledge of water. Growing up poor in rural Florida, they'd spent countless hours swimming in lakes, rivers, and coastal waters. They understood currents, tides, and how to survive in cold water better than most people understood walking. The Anglins had also escaped from prison before, multiple times. They had a reputation for being impossible to hold, which is exactly why they ended up on Alcatraz. Prison officials thought the water would finally stop them. They were wrong. The fourth man, Allen West. But there was a fourth conspirator in this plan, Allen West, a man whose story is both tragic and crucial to understanding what really happened that night. West had known Morris and the Anglins from previous prison stints. When they all ended up in neighboring cells at Alcatraz, the reunion wasn't coincidental. It was destiny. West was just as committed to the escape plan as the others. For months, he chipped away at his cell wall, helped gather materials, and contributed to the construction of their escape route. But on the night of June 11, 1962, fate dealt him the cruelest blow imaginable. His tunnel opening was just slightly too narrow. As Morris and the Anglins squeezed through their holes and made their way to freedom, West frantically tried to widen his passage. But time was running out. Dawn was approaching. The others couldn't wait any longer. By the time West finally broke through, his partners were gone. He was left behind, facing the consequences of their shared plan, while watching his only chance at freedom disappear into the fog. The next morning, West became the key witness to one of the most famous crimes in American history. His detailed confession to the FBI became the foundation of their investigation. But here's the question that haunted West for the rest of his life, and one that would prove crucial to the 2025 investigation. Did the others change their escape route knowing he might talk? What happened next was criminal genius at its finest. For 6 months, these men executed a plan so detailed, so perfectly orchestrated, that it makes Ocean's 11 look like amateur hour. The tools. First, they needed tools. In a maximum security prison where every spoon is counted and every piece of metal is tracked. So, how do you get digging equipment? You make it. Morris and the Anglins began collecting seemingly worthless items. A discarded saw blade from the prison workshop. Metal spoons that went missing during meals. Most ingeniously, they built a drill using a vacuum cleaner motor stolen from the cleaning supplies. But the real breakthrough came when they realized that Alcatraz's greatest strength, its age and durability, was also its weakness. The prison had been built on the ruins of a military fortress, and decades of salt air had corroded the concrete around the cell ventilation grates. What should have been impenetrable walls were actually crumbling from the inside. The digging night after night, they chipped away at the weakened concrete behind their sink vents. It was painstaking work. Each piece of concrete had to be removed silently, disposed of secretly, and the hole had to be perfectly concealed during daily inspections. The noise was the biggest challenge. In a prison where guards listened for every unusual sound, how do you mask the scraping and drilling? Morris's solution was brilliant. He played his accordion during the designated music hour each evening, using the wheezing, discordant sounds to cover the noise of their construction project. The concealment. But even more impressive than the digging was the concealment. Using magazines, paint, and incredible artistic skill, they created papier-mâché vent covers that were indistinguishable from the real thing. Guards doing their rounds would look directly at these fake vents and see nothing unusual. They even went so far as to mix concrete dust with soap to create a putty that could fill small holes and cracks, ensuring their work area looked completely normal during surprise inspections. The dummy heads. And then there were the dummy heads, probably the most famous part of their escape plan, and rightfully so. Using soap, toilet paper, toothpaste, and real human hair swept up from the prison barbershop, they sculpted incredibly lifelike decoys. These weren't crude approximations. They were works of art. The escapees studied their own facial features in mirrors, carefully molding each dummy to match their bone structure. They painted them with flesh tones mixed from art supplies stolen from the prison maintenance shop. The heads were so convincing that during nightly bed checks, guards would shine flashlights directly on them and see nothing suspicious. For crucial hours on the night of the escape, these dummies bought them the time they needed to reach the water and launch their raft. Now we get to the most controversial part of the escape plan, the infamous raincoat raft. For decades, experts have debated whether this makeshift vessel could have possibly survived the treacherous waters of San Francisco Bay. In 2025, we finally got our answer. The construction over 50 stolen raincoats were stitched together using thread taken from the prison workshop. But here's what most people don't realize. This wasn't random amateur sewing. The escapees used specific techniques to create watertight seams, overlapping the material in patterns that would distribute stress evenly across the raft's surface. The seams were then sealed using an ingenious method. Hot steam from the prison's heating pipes was used to melt and fuse the rubber, creating bonds that were actually stronger than the original material. They had essentially vulcanized their raft using the prison's own infrastructure. To inflate it, they converted a prison concertina into a makeshift air pump, a modification that required understanding of pneumatics that went far beyond what you'd expect from typical inmates. Even the paddles were carefully crafted from plywood scraps, shaped and balanced for maximum efficiency in the water, the science behind survival. For 60 years, the FBI maintained that this raft could never have survived the bay's conditions. They pointed to the freezing water temperatures, around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and the notorious currents that had claimed other escape attempts. But in 2014, Dutch researchers using advanced computer modeling made a startling discovery. If the escapees launched their raft between 11 p.m. and midnight on June 11, 1962, they would have caught a rare tidal window. During this narrow time frame, the currents would have carried them not out to sea, but toward Angel Island and the Marin shoreline. The FBI's 60-year-old assumption was wrong. But wait, it gets even more incredible, because what happened in 2025 proved that the raft was far more sophisticated than anyone imagined. Here's where our story takes a dramatic turn. Because everything I've told you so far, everything the world has believed for 6 decades, was just the beginning of the truth. In early 2025, marine researchers conducting a routine climate study sent a drone to survey the seafloor northeast of Alcatraz. They were looking for changes in sediment patterns. What they found instead was a piece of history that would rewrite the entire escape narrative. The DNA bombshell. The drone's sonar picked up a cylindrical object buried under decades of silt. When divers retrieved it, they found a perfectly preserved section of the legendary Raincoat Raft, and inside it, sealed in a glass vial that had somehow survived 63 years underwater, were 3 human hairs. Now, hair samples from the 1960s weren't exactly cutting-edge forensic evidence, but in 2025, scientists had access to ultra-fragmentary DNA reconstruction. Technology so advanced it could extract full genetic profiles from samples once considered useless. The results sent shockwaves through the FBI. The hairs matched living relatives of the Anglin brothers with 99.7% certainty. At least one of the escapees had survived the plunge into San Francisco Bay. But that was just the beginning of the revelations. The military-grade secret. When forensic specialists examined the raft fragment under electron microscopes, they found something that made their blood run cold. Embedded in the fabric were microscopic metallic particles, a composite material that didn't exist in any commercial product in 1962. The signature was unmistakable. Experimental naval coatings used exclusively by military contractors. Let that sink in for a moment. The men who supposedly built their escape raft from stolen prison raincoats had somehow incorporated materials that were classified military secrets. Either they were the luckiest thieves in history, or someone with access to advanced government resources had helped them. The listening post. But it gets even more disturbing. Researchers digging through newly declassified Bureau of Prisons files found a single-page stamped interagency coordination from the night of the escape. It referenced encrypted radio transmissions detected by Coast Guard monitoring stations, transmissions that originated from a vessel positioned exactly 2 miles beyond the Golden Gate Bridge. No official boats were supposed to be in that area, yet someone was out there, broadcasting on frequencies used by intelligence agencies during the exact window when the escapees would have been in the water. For 63 years, the world believed 3 desperate prisoners had launched themselves into the bay on a suicide mission. But the evidence was mounting that this wasn't a desperate escape at all, it was an extraction. Just when investigators thought they'd seen everything, a construction crew dredging a marina in Sausalito made a discovery that would blow the case wide open. Buried in the mud was a rusted metal box, its contents sealed in layers of wax. Inside were 2 Polaroid photographs, crystal clear despite being underwater for decades. The photos were dated July 1965, 3 years after the escape. They showed 3 men, bearded and weathered, standing beside a fishing boat in what appeared to be a South American harbor. The men looked older than the 1962 prison photos, but the bone structure, the spacing of the eyes, the distinctive features were unmistakable. Facial recognition AI, trained on thousands of historical images, returned its verdict. 92% probability match to Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. The location was identified as Belém, Brazil, a city at the mouth of the Amazon River, thousands of miles from Alcatraz and far beyond the reach of 1960s American law enforcement. But here's what made this discovery truly explosive. Attached to the photographs was a handwritten note in Portuguese that roughly translated to, "The 3 Americans send their regards to their friends in California." Someone had wanted these photos to be found. If you thought that was shocking, you haven't heard anything yet. Because in 2025, routine declassification of Cold War documents revealed something that transformed the entire escape from a prison break into something far more sinister. A 1967 CIA memorandum, buried in thousands of pages of bureaucratic correspondence, contained a reference to Operation Echo, a covert program designed to monitor and potentially recruit fugitive assets in South America. The memo listed 3 individuals under consideration for possible operational recruitment, identified only by their initials, FM, JA, and CA. Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, the exact men who had escaped from Alcatraz 5 years earlier, the European network. But the CIA connection was just the tip of the iceberg. Advanced AI analysis of Cold War surveillance footage revealed something that defied belief. In at least 3 separate instances between 1974 and 1979, figures with biometric matches to the escapees appeared in European cities at locations connected to U.S. intelligence operations. In 1974, someone matching Frank Morris was photographed near an East Berlin listening post. In 1978, a figure resembling Clarence Anglin entered a Rome bank under an alias later traced to a CIA shell company. Most shocking of all, a 1979 diplomatic reception in Singapore captured what appeared to be Morris in casual conversation with a known intelligence officer. These weren't men hiding in South American jungles. They were operatives moving through the shadow networks of the Cold War. The coded letters. At the same time, forensic linguists analyzing letters sent anonymously to newspapers in the 1980s discovered something remarkable. Hidden in the punctuation patterns was a cipher that, when decoded, referenced Operation Shoreline, a classified program for prisoner exchanges during the height of Cold War tensions. One letter, postmarked from Detroit in 1986, contained a phrase that sent chills down investigators' spines. The rock was never the end, it was the beginning. While all this was happening, oceanographers conducting seismic surveys of San Francisco Bay made a discovery that would rewrite everything we thought we knew about the escape. In a debris field less than half a mile from where the raft fragment was found, underwater cameras spotted something that shouldn't have existed. A corroded steel container, sealed and watertight despite 6 decades on the ocean floor. Inside were navigation charts, coded notebooks, and a hand-drawn map marking 3 specific points: Alcatraz Island, the Farallon Islands, and a set of coordinates pointing to a location far out in the Pacific Ocean. The underwater base. Following those coordinates led to the most staggering discovery of all. In April 2025, a deep-sea exploration drone launched from a research vessel found a massive underwater structure rising from the ocean floor. A complex of steel and concrete larger than a football field. Clearly man-made and completely absent from any official records. The structure's walls bore serial numbers traced back to U.S. Navy construction projects from the early 1960s. And inside sealed chambers within the complex, explorers found crates stamped with 3 sets of initials that had become all too familiar: FM, JA, CA. The crates contained thousands of documents dated between 1963 and 1968, 5 years after the supposed drowning of the Alcatraz escapees. The papers detailed radio communications, asset movements, and references to Project Meridian, a program that appeared in no official records but was clearly linked to Cold War intelligence operations. The witness emerges. Just when the evidence seemed overwhelming, a witness came forward who had kept silent for over 60 years. Louis Becker, now 83 years old and a former contractor for naval logistics, provided sworn testimony that he had personally overseen supply deliveries to the offshore facility in 1964. His description was chilling. 3 men living under assumed names, heavily guarded but free to move around the facility. One spent hours studying navigation charts. Another worked on radio equipment. They weren't prisoners, Becker testified. They were being trained for something. By the early 1980s, the Cold War was winding down, and the usefulness of assets like the Alcatraz escapees was coming to an end. A memo discovered in the National Archives, dated 1982, referenced asset retirement procedures for operatives codenamed Echo and Mariner. The men who had escaped Alcatraz were about to disappear again. The Virginia discovery. In July 2025, investigators opened a sealed storage room beneath a decommissioned naval facility in Virginia, a room that hadn't been accessed in over 40 years. Inside, bolted to the concrete floor, was a single steel cabinet containing 3 dossiers bound in red tape. Each bore one of the familiar code names: Echo, Mariner, Locksmith. But what lay beneath those files froze investigators in their tracks. 3 U.S. passports issued in 1984, under completely new identities, all stamped with exit visas for Reykjavik, Iceland. The Arctic Trail. Digital forensics experts analyzing Cold War satellite data discovered unscheduled flights departing from a remote airstrip in northern Canada during the winter of 1984. Heat signature analysis showed 3 figures boarding under heavy security before the aircraft disappeared over the Arctic Circle. Icelandic customs records from that same week listed 3 foreign nationals arriving under aliases that matched the names on the Virginia passports. The men who had vanished from Alcatraz in 1962 had simply vanished again, this time into the frozen wilderness of the far north. For most people, the trail would have gone cold in Iceland, but intelligence communications intercepted by NSA listening posts told a different story. Throughout the 1990s, encrypted transmissions continued to emanate from somewhere in the Arctic Circle, using communication protocols that matched those established for the original Echo operation. The Research Station. In 2025, climate scientists surveying glacial retreat zones made a discovery that defied explanation. Half buried beneath melting ice was the wreckage of a small research outpost, containing equipment and supplies dating from the 1980s and 1990s. Inside were notebooks written in 3 distinct handwritings, containing technical schematics, navigation charts, and experimental communication protocols decades ahead of their time. One entry, dated 1996, contained a phrase that would haunt investigators: "We were not rescued. We were repurposed." Handwriting analysis confirmed what everyone suspected. The writing belonged to Frank Morris. The final transmission's NSA records showed that signals from the Arctic location continued until 1999, 37 years after the original escape from Alcatraz. Then, abruptly, they stopped. What happened to the 3 men in that final year remains one of the greatest mysteries of the entire saga. Were they extracted again? Did they die in the harsh Arctic conditions? Or did they simply decide to disappear one final time? In August 2025, a private satellite imaging company conducting routine Arctic surveys captured something that sent shockwaves through intelligence communities worldwide. At coordinates roughly 500 miles from the nearest known human settlement, a small aircraft was photographed landing on what appeared to be a temporary ice runway. Standing beside the plane, partially obscured by Arctic clothing, were 3 figures. They appeared elderly, frail, but unmistakably human. Advanced facial recognition analysis suggested a 78% probability match to age-progressed images of Morris and the Anglin brothers. Hours later, when government satellites were repositioned to capture the same location, the airstrip had vanished. Nothing remained but endless white snow and ice, the eternal signal. But perhaps the most haunting evidence of all comes not from satellite imagery or declassified documents, but from amateur radio enthusiasts who, in late 2025, detected a faint signal broadcasting on a frequency that had been silent for decades. The transmission repeats every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., the precise time that lights went out at Alcatraz on June 11, 1962. The message, distorted by decades of atmospheric interference, consists of just 3 words: We are waiting. So, what really happened on that foggy night in June 1962? After 63 years of mystery, government cover-ups, and endless speculation, the evidence paints a picture that's far more complex and disturbing than anyone imagined. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers didn't just escape from the Alcatraz, they were extracted. The sophisticated raft, the military-grade materials, the offshore coordination, the waiting vessel, none of it was the desperate improvisation of 3 condemned prisoners. It was a carefully orchestrated intelligence operation. The CIA, recognizing the unique skills and intelligence of these 3 men, had arranged their extraction with one condition. They would work as covert assets during the most dangerous period of the Cold War. For over 2 decades, they operated in the shadows, moving through South America, Europe, and Asia on missions that remain classified to this day. They weren't fugitives running from justice. They were operatives serving a country that had officially declared them dead. When their usefulness expired in the 1980s, they were retired to the most remote location on Earth, the Arctic wilderness, where they could live out their lives in isolation, carrying secrets that could never be revealed. The bigger picture. But this story isn't just about 3 men who escaped from prison. It's about how intelligence agencies operated during the Cold War, how individuals could be erased from official existence, and how the line between criminal and asset could become impossibly blurred. It's about a government willing to fake deaths, manipulate evidence, and maintain elaborate deceptions for decades, all in the name of national security. And it's about 3 men who became legends not because they escaped from Alcatraz, but because they agreed to disappear from history itself. Even with all this evidence, mysteries remain. Are Morris and the Anglin brothers still alive somewhere in the Arctic wasteland? What missions did they complete during their decades as covert operatives? And what secrets do they carry that are still too dangerous to reveal? The radio signals continue. The coordinates remain classified. And every night at 3:17 a.m., that haunting message echoes through the static. We are waiting. Waiting for what? For recognition? For permission to come home? For the day when their true story can finally be told without endangering national security? Or are they simply waiting for death to finally close the book on the greatest prison escape and subsequent cover-up in American history?